This story is titled, My Wife's Rich Family Demanded that I sign a prenuptial agreement, and she cheated. Now she is begging to reconcile because I am leaving her penniless. Alright, I don't even know how to begin this. But I'm sitting here at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. And I can't get the anger out of my head. I never thought I'd be the guy posting about his life falling apart on the internet, but here I am. After 20 years of marriage, my wife cheated on me. 20 years of trust, love, and partnership, all shattered for someone closer to our children's age than hers. The betrayal is surreal, almost incomprehensible. I don't feel angry yet, just numb, as if my mind hasn't fully accepted what's happened. The hurt is there, simmering, but it's taking its time to hit me properly. We met in college, two people from completely different worlds. My family was modest, hardworking, and content with what little we had. My wife, on the other hand, came from wealth and privilege. Her father owned successful businesses, and her mother lived for extravagant charity galas and social events. From the moment I met her parents, I knew they didn't approve of me. Though they never outright said it, their disapproval was obvious. Her mother, Florence, masked her disdain behind polite questions about my future. Her father, Peter, was less subtle. His cold, judgmental stares and gruff responses made it clear I wasn't the son-in-law he envisioned. Still, none of that mattered to us. We were young, in love, and determined to build a life together. When we got engaged, her parents made their disdain official with a prenuptial agreement. I remember sitting in their sprawling living room, their lawyer outlining the terms while Peter practically glared at me. The message was clear: if we divorced, I wouldn't be entitled to a dime of their family's money. At the time, I didn't care. I wasn't marrying her for her wealth. I had nothing to my name and no expectations of anything from them. Without hesitation, I signed the papers. Looking back, that was the first time I allowed them to treat me like I was lesser. But I brushed it off because I loved her, and she loved me. That was enough. We married in our early 20s, and soon after, we started our family. Ruby, our first child, was born, followed by Richard, Michael, and Linda. Life was good. It wasn't always easy, but I worked hard, pulling long hours to provide for my family. My wife stayed home with the kids, a choice we both agreed on. It wasn't always financially easy, but I took pride in giving her the freedom to focus on raising our children. Her family's money was always there as a cushion. They funded vacations, covered private school tuition, and helped with other expenses. While it wasn't something I depended on, it certainly made life easier for her. I handled the essentials, our house, bills, groceries, while her family's contributions allowed her to enjoy a level of comfort she'd grown up with. Then, about 10 years ago, everything changed. Her family's fortune began to crumble. Lawsuits, bad investments, and failed businesses wiped out their wealth. The allowances stopped, the vacations ended, and the life of ease she'd known vanished. I didn't ask her to get a job when the money dried up. I worked harder, picking up extra hours and taking on more responsibility to keep us afloat. I thought we were a team. I thought we were weathering the storm together. But she began to change. She became bitter, often reminiscing about how much better things were before. She lamented the things we didn't have, the lifestyle she had lost. At the time, I thought it was just a natural reaction to the upheaval in her life. She had grown up surrounded by wealth and privilege, and now she was living a normal life. I believed we could get through it. Then came the betrayal. She cheated on me. The signs were there, small at first, but I didn't notice them until it was too late. I had been working late more often. With layoffs and mounting pressure at work, I was putting in extra hours to ensure our family's stability. She didn't complain about my long hours like she used to, which, in hindsight, should have been a red flag. I thought she had simply grown accustomed to the demands of my job over the years. One night, I came home late and found her sitting on the couch, laughing at something on her phone. The moment she saw me, she quickly put the phone down, her demeanor shifting. It was subtle, but I felt it, a strange, unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was off. I couldn't explain it at the time. It wasn't anything overt, just a sense that the easy rhythm of our marriage had shifted, like an invisible thread between us had frayed. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just stressed from work. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I ignored the strange feeling at first. What could I possibly say? Hey, I don't like the way you laugh at your phone. It sounded absurd, so I let it go. But the unease didn't fade. Over the following weeks, her behavior became increasingly suspicious. She started taking her phone with her everywhere, the bathroom, the kitchen, even the garden while watering plants. It wasn't like her at all. My wife had never been attached to technology. She'd even tease me about being glued to my laptop. But now her phone seemed to be her constant companion. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. After 20 years of marriage, I thought I knew her better than anyone. I brushed it off as stress or paranoia, telling myself everything was fine. But then there were the errands. She started running out for groceries or gifts at odd times, always alone. I'd come home to hear from the kids that she had just left to pick something up. One day, I happened to leave work early because a meeting was cancelled. While driving, I spotted our car parked at a strip mall across town. Curious, I pulled into the lot. At first, I thought she must be shopping, but then I saw her sitting in the car with someone in the passenger seat. It wasn't one of our kids. My heart dropped. I couldn't see his face, but I knew something was wrong. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to confront her, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or some lingering hope that I was mistaken. Instead, I drove away and went home. That night, I couldn't look at her the same way. Her words, her smiles, they all felt fake, as though I was seeing her through a completely different lens. The doubt gnawed at me until I knew I had to find the truth. One evening, while she was showering, she left her phone charging in the kitchen. I finally gave in and looked. Her password hadn't changed, so I got in right away. What I found confirmed everything. Dozens of texts to someone named Robert filled her phone. They weren't even subtle, flirty, suggestive, and downright disgusting at times. Messages like, "Can't wait to see you again," and "Last night was amazing," made my stomach churn. There were even pictures, not explicit but enough to erase any doubt about what was going on. I stood in the kitchen, shaking, and the phone in my hand. My head pounded as though it would split open. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked outside, desperate to breathe. I stood in the yard staring at nothing, the weight of everything crushing me. When I came back inside, she was out of the shower, her hair still wet. She smiled at me, asking if I wanted to watch a movie later. That smile, that fake, casual smile, was what broke me. How could she act like nothing had happened? How could she look me in the eye and pretend everything was fine? I didn't say a word that night. I lay in bed beside her, pretending to sleep, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to wake her up and confront her right then and there. Another part felt numb, as though if I stayed quiet long enough, I could pretend I hadn't seen anything. The next day, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell her. I left for work as usual, sat in my car for an hour, and then found a divorce attorney with excellent reviews. I didn't want to play games. I needed to understand my options and figure out how to leave this marriage as cleanly as possible. My lawyer was calm and practical, telling me to gather evidence before confronting her. I needed proof beyond the texts. For the next week, I acted like everything was fine while quietly collecting evidence, screenshots of messages, location histories, and bank statements. It felt like I was a detective in my own house, a stranger in the life I had built. That week was the worst of my life. When I finally had enough evidence, my lawyer filed the paperwork. My wife was served the next morning. I'll never forget her face when she opened the envelope: shock, confusion, maybe even fear. She looked up at me, and all I said was, "I know." Then I walked out of the room. That day marked the end of my control over the situation. I thought things would quiet down, but instead, they got messier. I wanted to shield our kids from the details, believing they didn't need to know about their mother's betrayal. But the moment she was served, she flipped the narrative. She gathered the kids in the living room and told them I was giving up on the family over one mistake. One mistake, that's how she described it, like forgetting to take out the trash or missing a dinner reservation. Richard, our 18-year-old, was the first to confront me. He came into my office one evening, sat down, and bluntly asked, "Dad, what's going on?" I tried to keep my answer simple, telling him that his mom and I had serious issues and wouldn't be staying together. He nodded, then asked, "Did she cheat?" The question hit me like a punch. I wasn't expecting him to piece it together so quickly, but Richard's always been sharp. I couldn't lie to him. I said, "Yes, she did." I saw the flash of anger in his face, but he didn't say anything else. He just nodded again and left. After that, the other kids started asking questions. Linda, our 20-year-old, texted me first. She's quieter and more reserved, but I could tell she was hurt. Michael, our 19-year-old, was the most upset. He called me and asked if there was any way we could work things out for the family's sake. I had to explain that trust is the foundation of a marriage, and once it's broken, it can't be repaired. He didn't like it, but he seemed to understand. That's where things stood, my wife trying to paint herself as the victim while I struggled to navigate the fallout with my kids. Ruby, our eldest daughter at 22, has been the hardest part of this entire ordeal. She's always been closer to her mom, more than she's ever been to me. I was the strict parent, the one who enforced rules, while her mom played the easygoing, fun one. So, when Ruby immediately sided with her mom after learning about the divorce, it didn't surprise me, but it still hurt deeply. She came to my house one evening, demanding to talk. The moment she stepped inside, she unleashed her anger. Her first words weren't a question, or an attempt to understand my side, they were accusations. "Why are you doing this to Mom?" I stayed calm. No matter how much it hurt, she's my daughter, and I love her. I told her the truth, plainly, her mom cheated, and I couldn't forgive it. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Ruby broke down, crying and insisting that her mom was sorry, that she wanted to fix things. I explained to her as gently as I could that this wasn't something you fix. "This isn't a broken plate you can glue back together," I said. Her mom made choices that destroyed the marriage. Staying with someone who didn't respect me wasn't an option. Ruby looked at me like I'd betrayed her. "You're just giving up," she said. "You're destroying this family because you're too proud to forgive her." Her words hit me like a knife. I wanted to scream back that I'd given 20 years to this marriage and that her mother had been the one to destroy it. But yelling wouldn't solve anything, so I bit my tongue. I told her I loved her, but this was between her mom and me, and it wasn't her job to fix it. Ruby left angry. For weeks after, every time I heard from her, it was the same thing, pleading, crying, and begging me to reconsider. I offered to pay for therapy because I knew she was hurting, but she refused. She insisted there wouldn't be anything to cope with if I just stopped the divorce. Eventually, for my own mental health, I had to limit contact with her. It killed me to do it, but I couldn't keep having the same argument. I told her I'd be ready to talk again when things calmed down, but for now, I needed space. The other kids handled things differently. Richard, 18, stopped talking to his mom entirely after learning about the cheating. Linda, 20, stayed neutral, though I could tell she quietly supported me. Michael, 19, was torn. He kept his distance from both of us, trying not to take sides. My wife, however, saw Ruby's reaction as leverage. She weaponized her against me, feeding her lines to pressure me into reconciliation. Suddenly, Ruby was sending me long messages about how much her mom regretted her actions, how she deserved a second chance, and how I was being unfair. I knew those words weren't Ruby's, they were her mother's. That realization enraged me. My wife wasn't trying to save our marriage, she was trying to save herself. The prenup ensured she wouldn't come out of the divorce with much, and she was using our kids to manipulate me into staying. It broke something in me. Watching my kids get dragged into this mess, seeing Ruby fight me while my wife pulled the strings, it made me feel like I was losing my family, piece by piece, with no way to stop it. Then came Linda's 20th birthday. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner at my house, pizza, cake, and time together to celebrate Linda's quiet, low-key nature. It was also the first time my wife and I would be in the same room since I filed for divorce. I set one ground rule: no talk about the divorce. I texted both Ruby and my wife days in advance, making it clear that this day was about Linda and not our issues. Neither replied, which should have been my first warning that things would go sideways. On the day of the dinner, everyone arrived. My wife, of course, was the last to show up, with Ruby right behind her. It was typical for her to make an entrance. From the moment they walked in, the tension was palpable. My wife smiled at me like nothing had happened, and Ruby wouldn't even look my way. I kept my mouth shut, determined not to start a fight. Dinner was tense. The kids. Linda's birthday dinner was supposed to be a quiet, family-focused evening, a small celebration with cake, pizza, and the kids. It was also the first time my wife and I would be in the same room since I filed for divorce. Despite the tension between us, I made it clear to everyone, the divorce wasn't to be discussed. This night was for Linda, not our issues. But as the evening unfolded, the invisible weight of everything lingered over the table. The kids tried their best to keep the mood light, making small talk about work and school, but the unease was palpable. My wife's every comment felt forced, as if she were trying too hard to appear normal. Ruby, usually a chatterbox, barely said 2 words. When we reached the cake, Linda seemed happy enough. I focused on her, determined to make her feel celebrated despite the awkwardness. But as soon as the candles were blown out and the first slice was cut, my wife decided to turn the moment into her stage. She raised her glass, saying how wonderful it was to have the family together again and how important it was to put aside differences for the people we love. Her words, though seemingly sweet, were a calculated jab. She was using Linda's birthday to guilt-trip me in front of the kids, disguised as a loving sentiment. The room fell silent. I glanced at Linda, who stared down at her plate, visibly uncomfortable. Richard, my youngest, was the first to speak. He glared at my wife and said, "Are you serious right now? You couldn't just keep it to yourself for one night." My wife tried to act innocent, insisting she was simply expressing gratitude for the family being together. Richard wasn't buying it. "No, you're not. You're making everything about you, like always." Then Ruby jumped in, defending her mom. "She's not making it about her. She's trying to fix things. She's the only one trying to keep this family together." My head was pounding, and I tried to intervene before things spiraled. "Enough. This isn't the time or the place." But it was too late. Linda, who had been quiet all night, suddenly slammed her fork down. "Oh my God, just stop," she yelled, turning to Ruby. "You're only on Mom's side because you helped her cheat." The room went deathly silent. I froze, staring at Linda in shock. "What did you just say?" I asked. Linda was furious, her anger practically radiating off her. She turned to Ruby again. "You knew, didn't you? You knew about Mom's affair. And you helped her hide it." I looked at Ruby, and her face went pale. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, staring at her lap, looking as guilty as I've ever seen anyone look. My wife tried to deflect, her voice shaky. "Let's not do this right now. This isn't the time." But Richard cut her off. "Are you kidding me? You did this, and now Ruby helped you. You're unbelievable." Chaos erupted. Linda stormed out of the room. Richard was yelling at Ruby. Michael sat frozen, too stunned to react. I couldn't even process what was happening. I stood up, looked at Ruby, and said, "We're done talking for now. I can't even look at you." Then I walked out. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, trying to process it all. My wife had betrayed me, but Ruby? My own daughter had known about the affair and helped her mother cover it up. It was betrayal on top of betrayal, a wound so deep I couldn't even comprehend it. When I finally went back inside, the house was silent. Everyone had left. I sat alone in the dark, feeling like everything I'd worked for, the life I had built, my family, was crumbling around me. That night, I realized I couldn't keep trying to fix things with Ruby, not after this. I had already lost my wife, and now it felt like I'd lost my daughter too. The following days passed in a haze. I barely slept. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that would go cold, staring blankly into space, trying to make sense of it all. The silence in my house, once comforting after a long day, had become suffocating. It was eerie how everything around me looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. Linda's revelation about my eldest daughter having known about the affair and even helped her mother hide it, broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. I had always believed that no matter what happened between my wife and me, my kids would remain my anchor. I thought they'd understand that I had done everything I could for our family. But finding out that Ruby, the daughter I once carried on my shoulders and stayed up late helping with homework, had betrayed me, it hit like a freight train. The realization left me questioning everything. How long had she known? Had she sat at the dinner table, laughing at my jokes, while keeping her mother's secret? Every memory of Ruby felt tainted, every hug, every "I love you," every conversation we'd shared. At first, I didn't want to believe Linda's accusation. I hoped she'd misunderstood or exaggerated. But Ruby's pale face, her inability to deny it, and her guilty silence confirmed the truth. That morning, I tried to distract myself. I drove aimlessly around town, but every turn reminded me of my family, the gas station where I taught Ruby to drive, the park where we had picnics, the ice cream shop the kids adored when they were younger. My entire town seemed to mock me. When I got home, I tried drafting a text to Ruby, asking her why she had betrayed me. But every time I started, anger consumed me. "How could you?" I'd type before deleting it. I couldn't find the right words, and I knew any conversation would end in yelling. So I didn't send anything. That day, I replayed memories of Ruby in my mind. She used to sit in my lap and call me her hero. I took her to her first concert when she was 13, holding her hand so she wouldn't get lost in the crowd. She called me for advice when she moved out. How had we gotten here? How had I become the villain in her eyes? I wondered if I had failed her as a father. Did I work too much? Did I not spend enough time with her? These questions swirled in my mind, with no clear answers. That evening, the weight of it all broke me. I cried like I hadn't cried since losing my own father. It wasn't just about my wife anymore, it was about my daughter. I was grieving the family I thought I had and the trust one thought we shared. After that, I realized I needed to make a choice. I couldn't sit in my house, wallowing in pain. I couldn't let Ruby's betrayal define my days. I love her, she's my daughter, but I knew I couldn't fix this right now. She made her choices, and I wasn't going to let her guilt me into salvaging a marriage that was already dead. The next morning, I texted her, "Ruby, I love you, but I need space right now. I can't talk about this until I've had time to process. I hope you understand." She didn't respond, and while it hurt, it also gave me a sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control. Ruby may blame me for breaking up the family, but I refuse to carry that burden. I didn't cheat, lie, or drag her into this mess, her mother did. If she chooses to ignore that, it's on her, not me. I've decided to focus on the kids who still understand. Richard hasn't spoken to his mom since Linda's birthday. He's angry, but he's holding himself together. When I talked to him, he simply said, "Mom screwed up. That's not on you." Hearing that made me realize I wasn't completely alone. Linda, quiet since her outburst, seemed more at ease when I pulled her aside to check on her. I told her I was proud of her for standing up for what was right, even if it caused a scene. She teared up and said, "I just wanted the truth to come out." Hugging her gave me a glimmer of hope. Michael remains distant, but I know he'll come around eventually. He's always been the middle ground kid, and I don't blame him for not wanting to take sides. As for my wife, I haven't spoken to her directly since Linda's birthday. My lawyer handles everything, and I plan to keep it that way. The less contact I have with her, the better. I don't know what the future holds for Ruby and me. Maybe one day she'll realize the weight of what she did, and we can rebuild our relationship. Or maybe this wound will never heal. All I know is I can't force her to see the truth, and I can't let her or anyone else manipulate me with guilt. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time, focusing on the kids who are still here for me, and trying to rebuild a life that feels like it's been torn apart.